Chapter 1. The Shadow Attack. The morning was just beginning to brighten, and a sense of relief hung in the air. Jack Sullivan, Violet Harper, and Claire Belmont walked along the sidewalk, discussing their next steps after the fall of Greco's empire. They felt that, finally, they could start living without the constant threat that surrounded them. But the peace was short-lived. Out of nowhere, a black car with no plates screeched around the corner and sped towards them. The passenger window was lowered, revealing the dark mouth of a gun. Before anyone could react, shots rang out through the deserted street. Jack felt a searing pain in his abdomen and dropped to his knees as the car disappeared into the darkness. "Jack!" Violet screamed, rushing to him. Panic and determination shone in her eyes. Claire, pale and in shock, was already on the phone with 911. "We need an ambulance, now!" Jack tried to speak, but the pain was unbearable. He pressed on the wound, blood seeping through his fingers. His eyes met Violet's, and he tried to smile to reassure her, but managed only a groan. "It's going to be okay," Violet murmured, more to herself than to him, as she tried to staunch the bleeding. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. The paramedics quickly placed Jack on a stretcher and took him to the hospital. Violet and Claire followed closely behind, their hearts heavy with fear and uncertainty. At the hospital, Jack was taken directly to surgery. Violet and Claire waited in the waiting room, enveloped in a heavy and anxious silence. The sound of the clock on the wall seemed to mock their helplessness. After hours of waiting, a doctor finally appeared, his expression tired but professional. "He's stable," he said, his words bringing a momentary relief. "The bullet was removed, but he lost a lot of blood. He'll need time to recover." Violet let out a sigh of relief, but her mind was already racing, trying to understand who could have orchestrated the attack. "Claire, who did this? Who attacked us?" Claire shook her head, her eyes full of tears. "I don't know. I couldn't see anyone's face in the car. But someone wants to silence us." Violet bit her lip, determination growing within her. "We need to find out who is behind this. We can't let them keep attacking innocent people." Mystery Scene. Whispers in the Dark. Later that night, while Jack was still unconscious in his hospital bed, Violet and Claire met in a discreet cafe. The place was almost empty, providing the privacy they needed to discuss what to do next. "We need help," Violet said, staring intently at her coffee cup. "Someone who can investigate while Jack is out of action." Claire hesitated before speaking. "I know someone, an old contact of Leo's. He's a private investigator, very good at what he does. His name is Ethan Carter." Violet looked up, a flicker of hope appearing. "Can you contact him?" Claire nodded. "I'll try. If he knows we're in danger, he'll come." While Claire made the call, Violet reflected on the recent events. Life seemed to be testing them at every moment, but she knew they couldn't give up. The truth had to be uncovered, no matter the cost. A few minutes later, Claire returned with a slight smile. "He's coming. He said he can meet us in half an hour." Ethan Carter arrived punctually. He was a middle-aged man with a penetrating gaze and a confident demeanor. He sat with them, his eyes assessing every detail. "Claire, it's good to see you again, even under these circumstances," Ethan began, his voice deep. "Tell me everything that happened." Violet and Claire recounted the attack and the events leading up to Greco's arrest. Ethan listened attentively, occasionally making notes in a notebook. "This is not just a retaliatory attack," Ethan finally said. "It's something bigger. Greco may be in prison, but his allies are still free. We need to find out who they are and what they're planning." "And how do we do that?" Violet asked, determined. "We'll start by investigating the car they used," Ethan replied. "I'll check security cameras and look for witnesses. Meanwhile, stay alert and take care of Jack. He's a crucial piece in this game." Violet nodded, feeling the gravity of the situation. "We'll do that? And Ethan... Thank you. Ethan smiled, a smile full of determination. We're in this together. We'll find out who did this and make sure they pay for their crimes. As they left the cafe, the night seemed darker, but it also carried the promise of justice. Violet knew they were just at the beginning of a new and dangerous journey, and with Jack out of action, she would have to be stronger and more determined than ever. The battle was just beginning, and Violet, Claire, and Ethan were ready to face whatever came their way until the truth was finally revealed. Chapter 2. On the Trail of Truth. The city was shrouded in an oppressive darkness, a sort of cloak that hid secrets and whispers. The streetlights cast long, unsettling shadows across the streets, while the night breeze carried with it a promise of dangerous revelations. Ethan Carter, now in charge of the investigation, was determined to follow every lead until he uncovered the truth. Ethan began his search at the site of the attack. The street was silent, but the car's tire marks were still visible on the asphalt. He crouched down, examining every detail, every clue that might have been left behind. Ethan was no ordinary man. His ability to notice what others overlooked was what made him one of the best. Meanwhile, Violet and Claire remained at the hospital, keeping a vigilant watch over Jack. Every sound, every movement was a constant reminder of the vulnerability they now faced. But Ethan's presence and the promise of justice gave them renewed hope. In the middle of the night, Ethan returned to the hospital. His expression was serious, but there was a gleam of discovery in his eyes. "I found something," he said, sitting down next to Violet and Claire. Security cameras from a store on the corner caught part of the car's license plate. "It's not much, but it's a start." Violet looked at him with gratitude. "This could lead us somewhere, but why would they attack now? Greco is already out of the way." Ethan nodded. "Greco might be in prison, but his empire hasn't been completely dismantled. There are still those who followed him, who want revenge. We need to find out who they are and why they're still after you." As they discussed the situation, Jack began to show signs of improvement. His willpower, combined with the support of Violet and Claire, was aiding his recovery. Even in his weakened state, he couldn't hide his concern. "Don't stop on my account," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "We need to put an end to this, once and for all." The following days were a mix of constant vigilance and intense investigations. Ethan, using his contacts, managed to trace the car to a garage on the outskirts of the city. There, he found the mechanic, a nervous man who initially hesitated to speak. "I don't know anything," the mechanic stammered, his eyes avoiding Ethan's penetrating gaze. "I'm not here to hurt you," Ethan said calmly. "But you need to understand, we're dealing with dangerous people. If you know anything, it's best to speak now." The mechanic hesitated, but finally relented. "All I know is a man brought the car here a few days ago. He paid in cash and didn't say much. He seemed worried, always looking over his shoulder." "Would you recognize this man if you saw him again?" Ethan asked. The mechanic nodded. "Yes, I think so." With this new information, Ethan returned to the hospital to discuss the next steps. They needed to act quickly before the enemies had a chance to strike again. "Ethan, we need to stay one step ahead," Violet said, determination shining in her eyes. "We can't let them catch us off guard." "I agree," Ethan replied. "I'll use my connections to get a list of Greco's former associates. Someone must know who's behind these attacks." As they planned their next moves, the tension was palpable. Every moment was a race against time, a battle to unravel the web of intrigue before it was too late. That night, as Ethan left for another round of investigations, Violet looked at Claire and Jack. "We will succeed," she said, her voice firm. "We will find out who's behind this and ensure they never threaten anyone again." And so, With renewed determination and a plan in motion, they prepared to face whatever came their way. The darkness still loomed over the city, but now there was a light of hope. And that light, however faint, was enough to guide them in their quest for the truth. Chapter 3. Blood Ties. The following morning brought a pale sun that barely penetrated the dense fog enveloping the city. At the hospital, Jack was still recovering, but his willpower was admirable. Violet and Claire never left his side, while Ethan worked tirelessly to connect the pieces of the puzzle. Ethan sat in his makeshift office, surrounded by documents and photographs, trying to find a pattern. The mechanic had provided a description of the man who brought the car. Using this, Ethan began comparing the description to Greco's former associates. Violet entered the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Any news?" she asked, handing one of the cups to Ethan. "I'm making progress," Ethan replied, taking the cup. "I've found a few names that match the mechanic's description. I need to go out and check on these suspects." "I want to go with you," Violet said firmly. "They attacked Jack, and I won't stand by while you take all the risks alone." Ethan looked at her, admiring her determination. "You're brave, Violet, but we need to be careful. These men are dangerous." "I know," she replied, "but I'm willing to take the risk. Jack is out of action, and Claire is taking care of him. We'll go together." Ethan nodded, knowing that arguing would be pointless. They grabbed their coats and headed out, ready to follow the leads. The streets were busier now, but the somber atmosphere remained. Their first stop was an old warehouse, where one of Greco's associates, Tony Moretti, supposedly worked. The warehouse was quiet, with only a few men loading boxes. Ethan and Violet entered, their footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. They approached a burly man who seemed to be in charge. "We're looking for Tony Moretti," Ethan said, showing a photo. "Does he work here?" The man looked at the photo and scowled. "Moretti? Haven't seen him in weeks, but I heard he's been hiding out, heard something big was happening, and decided to lay low." "Something big?" Violet asked, intrigued. "I don't know the details," the man shrugged. "I just know he was more nervous than usual." Ethan thanked him and walked away with Violet. "We need to find Moretti," he said, his mind already calculating the next steps. "If he's hiding, we might get lucky at some of his usual haunts." They spent the rest of the day visiting bars, clubs, and other spots where Moretti was known to hang out, but always arrived too late. Finally, as night fell, a tip led them to a seedy hotel on the outskirts of the city. Ethan and Violet approached cautiously, prepared for anything. They entered the dimly lit, smoke-filled lobby, and Ethan showed Moretti's photo to the receptionist. "Is he staying here?" The receptionist, a thin, suspicious-looking man, glanced at the photo and slowly nodded. "Room 213, but I'll warn you, he doesn't like visitors." Ignoring the warning, Ethan and Violet climbed the stairs to room 213. The door was slightly ajar, and restless footsteps could be heard from inside. Ethan pushed the door open slowly, revealing Moretti, who turned to face them with wide eyes. "Moretti," Ethan began, trying to stay calm. "We need to talk." Moretti raised his hands defensively. "I don't know anything. I'm not involved in this." "No one said you were," Violet replied, stepping into the room. "But we know you know something. Who's attacking us? Why?" Moretti hesitated, his expression shifting between fear and resolve. "They're the goons of a man named Dominic Russo. He was Greco's right-hand man. With Greco gone, Russo is trying to take over, and he sees you as a threat." "Russo," Ethan repeated, jotting down the name. "Where can we find him?" Moretti shook his head. "He's smart, never stays in one place for long, but I heard he has a meeting tomorrow night at a club called Eclipse." Violet and Ethan exchanged a look, already formulating a plan. "Thank you, Moretti," Ethan said. "Stay out of trouble." As they left the hotel, the tension in the air was palpable. They knew the meeting at Eclipse would be dangerous, but it was also a chance to confront Russo and end the threat once and for all. Chapter 4. The Eclipse Club night fell over the city, bringing with it an aura of tension and danger. The Eclipse Club, located in a darker part of the city, was known for its illegal activities and the dubious clientele it attracted. Ethan and Violet were ready to face whatever came their way. They knew that meeting Dominic Russo could be the decisive moment in their quest for the truth. Dressed to blend in with the crowd, Ethan and Violet entered the club. The low lights and pulsating music created an atmosphere heavy with secrets. The smell of cigarettes and alcohol was intense, mingling with the constant murmur of clandestine conversations. They headed to the bar, where Ethan ordered 2 drinks. "Keep an eye out," he whispered to Violet as he handed her one of the drinks. "Russo should be here. Let's blend in until we find him." Violet nodded, her eyes scanning the room. The club was crowded, but she knew the superficial calm could turn into chaos at any moment. They separated, each discreetly observing as they moved through the crowd. In the far corner of the club, Ethan spotted a group of men around a table. In the center sat a burly, menacing-looking man, speaking with authority. Dominic Russo. Ethan approached, pretending to be interested in the card game at the adjacent table. He needed to hear what Russo was saying. "We need to increase security," Russo was telling his men. "Greco is out, but our problems are far from over. Those idiots who interfered with our plans need to be eliminated." Ethan exchanged a quick glance with Violet, who was a few meters away, also keeping an eye on the situation. They had to act cautiously. Any wrong move could result in a bloodbath. Violet took out her phone and sent a message to Claire, who was at the hospital with Jack. "Found Russo at the Eclipse. Stay alert and keep Jack safe." Claire replied quickly, "Be careful. I'll alert hospital security to increase vigilance." As Russo continued giving orders, Ethan decided it was time to act. He approached the table, interrupting the conversation. "Russo," he said firmly, "we need to talk." Russo's men instantly stood up, ready for action. Russo raised his hand, ordering them to stay calm. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, eyeing Ethan suspiciously. "I'm someone who won't let you continue with your plans," Ethan replied, his voice cold. "You've caused enough suffering. It's time to pay for your crimes." Russo laughed, an unpleasant sound that made Violet's skin crawl. "You think you can come here and threaten me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ethan stood his ground. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I'm not alone." At that moment, Violet stepped forward, standing beside Ethan. "Russo, your game is over. We know about your plans and we're not going to let you continue." Russo looked at her with disdain. "You two are brave, I'll admit. But you won't leave here alive." The atmosphere in the club grew tense, as if the air were about to explode. But before anyone could react, the police stormed the place. Sirens and shouts filled the air as officers quickly moved to arrest Russo and his men. Ethan smiled slightly. "I guess you underestimated our determination, Russo." As the police handcuffed Russo, he cast a murderous glance at Ethan and Violet. "This isn't over here, or Saufuro. Der yo sor krafurior diriid." "I have allies who won't stop until you're destroyed. We'll see about that," Ethan replied as he and Violet were escorted out of the club by the police. Outside, away from the chaos, Violet let out a sigh of relief. "We got Russo, but he wasn't the only one." "Yes," Ethan agreed. "We still have a lot of work ahead, but every step we take brings us closer to the truth." They returned to the hospital, where Claire and Jack were waiting for them. Jack was stronger, determined to join the fight as soon as he could. "How did it go?" Jack asked, his voice full of anticipation. "We got Russo," Ethan said, "but he won't be the last. We need to stay vigilant." Jack smiled, despite the pain. "Then let's keep going. We won't stop until all of them are where they belong, And so, with their first major victory in hand, the group prepared for the next phase of their mission. They knew the road ahead was still long and dangerous, but they were ready to face any challenge that came their way. Chapter 5. Escape into the Night. The city seemed to breathe in an irregular rhythm, as if it felt the tension and imminent danger. Ethan, Violet, Claire, and Jack were back at the hospital, trying to catch their breath after the intense confrontation at the Eclipse Club. But the calm wouldn't last long. While Russo was being transported to the police station in a patrol car escorted by 2 police cars, his henchmen already had a plan in motion. They wouldn't let their leader be taken without a fight. On an isolated street, where street lighting was scarce and shadows dominated, the attack began. 2 black SUVs sped up, blocking the patrol car's path. A third SUV emerged from behind, closing off the escape route. The officers barely had time to react before shots were fired, shattering windows and causing the patrol car to roll over several times before coming to a stop on its side. The sound of twisting metal and the cries of injured officers echoed through the night. Russo, trapped in the back seat, smiled with a mix of relief and anger. His men hadn't abandoned him. They quickly opened the patrol car, pulling Russo from the wreckage. "Let's go, boss," one of the henchmen said, helping him out. "We need to get out of here before reinforcements arrive." The henchman loaded Russo into one of the SUVs and vanished into the darkness before the police could react. The rescue plan had been executed with deadly precision, and Russo was free again. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ethan received an urgent call from the police captain. "Ethan, we have a problem. The patrol car transporting Russo was attacked. He escaped." Ethan felt a chill down his spine. How did this happen? His henchmen were prepared, the captain explained. They knew exactly where and when to attack. We don't know how, but he's loose. We need to find him before he causes more damage. Ethan hung up the phone, looking at Violet, Claire, and Jack with a grave expression. Russo escaped. His men took him from the patrol car. "This means we're in danger again," said Claire, her face pale with worry. "We need a plan," said Violet, trying to stay calm. "We can't let him get away." Jack, still recovering, tried to get up. "I'll go with you." "No, Jack," Ethan replied firmly. "You're still weak. You need to recover. We'll take care of this." Jack reluctantly agreed, knowing Ethan was right. "Take care, and finish this once and for all." Ethan, Violet, and Claire prepared to leave. Ethan had some leads on where Russo might be hiding. He won't run far. He's probably hiding somewhere safe, waiting for the right moment to act again. They started searching for Russo at his known hideouts, checking every place where he could be. But the city was large, and Russo's network of allies was extensive. With each alley and empty warehouse, their frustration grew. Meanwhile, Russo was meeting with his henchmen in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. "They thought they could stop me," he said disdainfully, "but I'm still here, and we'll show them they can't take us down so easily." One of the henchmen, a tall man with a scarred face, approached. "What do we do now, boss?" "We'll finish them off once and for all," Russo replied, his voice full of venom. "But we need a plan, something that catches them by surprise." Back on the streets, Ethan received another call. This time, it was from an informant. "I heard Russo is hiding in a warehouse on 57th Street, but don't go alone. He's well protected." Ethan thanked him for the information and headed to the location with Violet and Claire. They knew this could be their best chance to catch Russo before he could organize another attack. Arriving at the warehouse, Ethan parked the car at a safe distance. "We need to be discreet. We'll go in through the back and try to catch them by surprise." They approached cautiously, each step calculated to avoid making noise. The warehouse was silent from the outside, but they knew danger was lurking inside. Ethan looked at Violet and Claire, signaling them to be ready. As they entered the warehouse, they found a grim and desolate scene. but knew Russo and his men were somewhere inside. Ethan drew his gun, prepared for the confrontation. "Let's end this." And so, in the darkness of the warehouse, tension grew as they prepared to face Russo and his henchmen in one final decisive showdown. Chapter 6. Ambush in the Shadows. The warehouse was too quiet, an unsettling calm that made Ethan stop and scrutinize the surroundings more closely. He, Violet, and Claire moved slowly, alert to every shadow and sound, ready for any surprise. But what they didn't know was that they were walking straight into a carefully set trap. Suddenly, the warehouse lights blazed on, blinding them momentarily. Before they could react, a dozen armed men appeared from all sides, surrounding them. Among them stood Dominic Russo, a cold smile on his face. "Did you think you could catch me that easily?" Russo mocked, stepping forward. "You walked right into it." Ethan reached for his weapon, but the henchmen were faster. In seconds, he, Violet, and Claire were disarmed and handcuffed. Russo approached, looking at them with disdain. "You thought you could stop me?" Russo said, staring directly at Ethan. "You're fools. Now, you'll pay for your insolence." Violet struggled against the handcuffs, her gaze fixed on Russo. "You won't get away with this, Russo. The police are after you. It's only a matter of time." Russo laughed, a joyless sound. "We'll see who laughs last." Russo's henchmen forced Ethan, Violet, and Claire into the back of a black van, locking them in the rear compartment. The van jolted into motion, taking them to an unknown destination. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Jack was beginning to worry about his friend's prolonged absence. In the middle of the night, Jack's phone rang, interrupting the silence of his hospital room. He answered quickly, feeling a wave of relief mixed with fear. "Ethan, Violet, where are you?" The voice on the other end wasn't Ethan's or Violet's. It was Russo's. "Good evening, Jack. I believe we have something of yours." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "What have you done with them?" Russo laughed again. "They're with me, in a safe place. But if you want to see them alive again, you'll have to cooperate." "I'm not doing anything until I know they're okay," Jack said, trying to stay calm despite the growing panic. "You're not in a position to make demands, Jack," Russo replied coldly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave that hospital and meet my men. They'll give you the instructions." The call ended abruptly, leaving Jack in an agonizing silence. He knew leaving the hospital in his condition was risky, but he had no choice. His friends needed him. Jack called a nurse and explained the situation, asking her to call a cab and help him leave discreetly. The nurse worried, hesitated, but Jack insisted. "Please, it's an emergency. My friends are in danger." With the nurse's help, Jack managed to leave the hospital and get into the cab. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Where to, sir?" Jack checked Russo's message for the instructions. "Take me to the old warehouse on 47th Street. The ride was tense, each minute feeling like an eternity. When they arrived at the warehouse, Jack saw two men waiting outside. They helped him out of the cab, their faces hard and impassive. "Russo said to bring you," one of the men said. "Follow us." Jack was led inside the warehouse, where he found Russo sitting in a chair, with a triumphant smile. Ethan, Violet, and Claire were tied to chairs beside him, visibly bruised, but alive. "Good to see you, Jack," Russo said, standing up. "Now that we're all here, we can discuss the terms." "Let them go, Russo," Jack demanded, his voice firm. "I'm here. You don't need them anymore." Russo shook his head. "It's not that simple. I need to ensure you won't run to the police." "So? Here's the deal." Jack looked at his friends, determination burning in his eyes. "What do you want?" "I want you to make a public confession," Russo said, stepping closer. "Say that you, Ethan, and your friends were involved in Greco's operations. Say the police are after you because of it. Do this, and I'll let them go." Jack knew that accepting these terms would ruin their lives, but refusing meant certain death for his friends. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "All right, I'll do it, but you have to let them go now." Russo smiled, satisfied. "We have a deal then." The tension in the air was palpable, and Jack knew he was entering a dangerous game. But he was willing to do anything to save his friends. The battle was far from over, and he needed to be stronger and smarter than ever. As they prepared for the next move, Jack and his friends understood that this was just one step in their fight against Russo. They would have to navigate carefully, using every bit of strength and cunning to outsmart their enemy, and finally bring him to justice. Chapter 7. Games of Deception. The warehouse was tense, laden with a mix of fear and determination. Jack, still feeling the effects of his recovery, stared intently at Russo. He knew he needed to buy time and think of a way to turn the tables in his favor. "Let's get this over with," Jack said, his voice betraying physical weakness, but not his willpower. "Where do you want me to make the confession?" Russo smiled, satisfied with Jack's apparent submission. "Right here. We're going to record a video and send it to the media. This will ensure that you and your friends are hunted by the police, while I take control of what's left of Greco's empire." Ethan, bound and bruised, lifted his head. "Jack, don't do it," he said, with difficulty. "He won't keep his word. We're all dead anyway if he gets what he wants." Russo stepped forward and struck Ethan hard, making his chair wobble. "Shut up," he growled. "You're in no position to give advice." Jack felt his anger rising, but knew he had to stay calm. "All right," he said. "Let's do this, but you need to release them first." Russo shook his head. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Jack. We'll do the recording, and then we'll see about your friends." Jack knew Russo wouldn't keep his word. He needed a plan. "Very well then, bring the camera." As one of the henchmen brought the camera, Jack looked at Violet, Claire, and Ethan, trying to convey hope through his eyes. He needed them to trust him, even if they didn't know what the plan was. The camera was set up, and Russo ordered Jack to stand. "Come on, Jack. Put on your show." Jack took a deep breath and began to speak, his words carefully chosen. "My name is Jack Sullivan. I'm here to confess that I, along with Ethan Carter, Violet Harper, and Claire Belmont, were involved in Greco's operations. The police are after us, and... Jack paused, as if struggling to continue. Russo stepped closer, impatient. "Keep going." Suddenly, Jack made a quick move, knocking over the camera and delivering a punch to Russo's stomach. The surprise was enough to destabilize Russo for a moment, and Jack seized the opportunity to grab a gun from one of the henchmen. A shootout erupted in the warehouse. Ethan, Violet, and Claire used the distraction to fight their captors, despite being handcuffed. Confusion and chaos reigned, with gunshots echoing and desperate shouts filling the air. In the midst of the firefight, Jack managed to free Violet and Claire, who quickly helped Ethan get loose. Together, they fought with all the strength they had left, facing Russo's henchmen one by one. Russo, still dazed, tried to escape through the back door, but Ethan intercepted him, pushing him back into the warehouse. "You're not getting away this time," Ethan said with determination. The final confrontation was brutal. Jack, Violet, Claire, and Ethan, now disarmed, used all their skills to face Russo and his henchmen. Amidst the chaos, they managed to disarm and subdue their enemies, though not without suffering more injuries. Finally, with Russo and his men incapacitated, the warehouse fell into a heavy silence. Jack, breathing heavily, looked at his friends. "We need to get out of here before more of Russo's henchmen arrive." Ethan agreed, helping Violet and Claire to their feet. "Let's call the police. We need to make sure Russo and his men are arrested, once and for all." They left the warehouse, wounded but victorious. Jack took out his phone and called the police captain, explaining the situation and requesting immediate reinforcements. He knew this was just one battle won, but it was a crucial step towards ending Russo's threat once and for all. As they waited for the police to arrive, Jack looked at his friends, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. "We did it, at least for now," he said, "but we need to be ready for what's next." Violet smiled, despite the exhaustion. "We're in this together, Jack. We'll finish this once and for all." With the police finally arriving and Russo being taken into custody, Jack, Violet, Claire, and Ethan knew the fight was far from over. But they were more determined than ever to ensure justice was served and peace was finally restored. Chapter 8. The net closes. Dawn was breaking when Jack, Ethan, Violet, and Claire were taken back to the hospital. Their bodies were tired and aching, but there was a sense of relief in the air. Dominic Russo was finally in police custody, and his henchmen were being hunted down one by one. But the fight was not yet over. At the hospital, Jack was immediately taken to an emergency room to treat his injuries, while the others were treated in the ER. The tension was still palpable, but there was a thread of hope. They had survived another battle, but they knew the real showdown was still to come. As Jack received medical care, Ethan, Violet, and Claire gathered in the waiting room. The silence between them was full of unanswered questions and unfinished plans. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "We need to find out who Russo's other allies are," he said, his voice low but determined. He mentioned having allies who would continue the fight. "We can't rest until all of them are neutralized." Violet nodded, looking at her bandaged hands. "We need information. Maybe Russo will talk under pressure. If we can get a list of his allies, we can end this once and for all." Claire, still looking worried, added, "But we need to be careful. Russo is just one part of this puzzle. We need to find out who's really in control now." Hours later, Jack returned, still pale but determined. "We need to talk to Russo. Maybe he'll be willing to make a deal." With the help of the police captain, they arranged a meeting with Russo in the prison. The setting was cold and sterile, and Russo seemed less threatening behind bars. However, his gaze was still sharp as a blade. "You've come back," said Russo with a cynical smile. "I thought you'd never want to see me again." Jack sat down at the table, facing Russo directly. "You're finished, Russo, but you can still do something useful. Tell us who your allies are, and maybe we can consider a deal." Russo laughed. "You think you can negotiate with me? My allies are powerful. Even if I give you some names, you'll never reach them." Ethan leaned forward, his voice loaded with threat. "You have nothing left to lose, Russo. But if you help us, we can ensure your sentence is lighter." There was a moment of tense silence as Russo considered his options. Finally, he sighed and began to speak. "All right, I'll give you some names. But remember, they're more dangerous than I ever was." He listed several names, including key figures in the criminal underworld who maintained operations in various parts of the city. With this information, Ethan, Jack, Violet, and Claire now had a clear mission: to dismantle Russo's criminal network once and for all. As they left the prison, Jack looked at his friends, determination burning in his eyes. "We have a lot of work to do. We can't let these men continue causing destruction." Violet agreed. "We need to be strategic. We'll take them down one by one until none of them are left." Over the next few weeks, the team split up to confront Russo's allies. Ethan led the investigation, using his contacts to gather evidence and plan precise strikes. Violet and Claire worked together, using their persuasion and infiltration skills to obtain crucial information. Jack, still recovering, coordinated the operations, ensuring everyone was always one step ahead. Each confrontation was risky and fraught with danger, but with every victory, they came closer to ending the nightmare that had begun with Greco's fall. The illegal operations were dismantled one by one, and the criminals were arrested, finally bringing a sense of peace within reach. Finally, After weeks of pursuits and confrontations, the last of Russo's allies was captured. The city began to breathe easier, and the tension that had hung in the air started to dissipate. On a quiet night, the team gathered in Ethan's makeshift office. The feeling of relief was palpable, but there was also a sense of renewed purpose. "We did it," Jack said with a smile of satisfaction. "We took down Russo's network." Violet nodded, her gaze determined. "I am for 9 sautu, and there will always be someone trying to take Greco's and Russo's place. But now, we're ready." Ethan raised his glass in a silent toast, to justice and to friends who never give up. With the criminal network finally dismantled, they knew new challenges could arise. But together, they were ready to face anything that came their way.